the topic of this study, the purpose of it is to see, 100 grams of protein. It's a massive amount. And so when we eat or consume 100 grams of protein, how much of it is used? And that was the point of it. And that's what people are kind of hemming and hawing over online, but they're missing the magic of this study.
Bringing you a reasoned approach to health and fitness. This is the Phi Life Podcast.
Welcome to the Phi Life Podcast. I'm John Barbin. With me is Brad Pilon. And today we're going to talk about a study that came out relatively recently about protein. Maybe many of you have actually heard about this. And it's a post-workout protein feeding study. And it touches on just how much protein we can actually ingest in one shot. Anyways, I'm going to throw it over to Brad. He's done all the background research here, and I have not. So I've just peripherally heard about it. So I'm going to kind of just ask questions, and I'm going to get educated along the way here.
Yeah. So this is the 100 gram of protein study that I'm sure who's been perusing nutrition info has seen a tweet, a post, or even a podcast completely covering this study. And the topic of this study, the purpose of it is to see, 100 grams of protein. It's a massive amount. And so when we eat or consume 100 grams of protein, how much of it is used? And that was the point of it. And that's what people are kind of hemming and hawing over online, but they're missing the magic of this study. And this study, John, it did something that you and I noticed way back in the early 2000s with Kevin Tipton studies. When Kevin Tipton was studying amino acids. Remember, he would have his subjects do 8 sets of 8 on the leg press at 80% of 1 rep max, just like a brutal leg press workout. Then he would feed them a big bolus dose of amino acids, and then he would measure them. And there was something about his protocols that you and I really liked. Now, I'm not going to give it away here, but I'm going to touch on it at the end of this sort of review. Because we're going to review this study, and then we're going to let everybody know about what I consider to be the true sort of miracle magic that happened in this trial.
Okay,
and I think go ahead.
So to start with, let's walk. We should explain what eventually, I guess, the conclusion. And you're going to go through the strength and weakness. So let's set the stage so people have it in their head. Like as you're talking us through it, we already know like how it ends. So then it builds the story like in between.
Yeah, okay. So the part that it ends with, that's the obvious part, is that when you consume 100 grams of protein acutely, so not, massive amounts of protein every single day, but when you just jack in 100 grams of protein into your body, you end up utilizing almost all of that protein. We do have the ability to slowly ramp up our protein oxidation or the use of protein as a fuel. But it takes multiple days of a high protein diet before your body goes, oh, okay, this is a fuel source now. I'm going to start burning some of this. When we acutely just give a giant bolus of 100 grams of protein in a shake, your body can't upregulate that quickly. Interestingly, some carnivores can, but we cannot. And so that 100 grams is sitting there, and it goes right to use if it's post-workout. And we're going to talk about that coming up. But what I want to do is start by basically helping people walk through what it would be like if they were in this study. And by doing that, see if we can pick up on the part that I think is truly fantastic about the study. So it's January 2019. You signed up for a study. You signed all the documents. You signed the safety forms, everything. You're in this trial. You're weighed. You're measured. They do your body composition via DEXA. And you get your first assignment. And that first assignment is next Friday, you're going to come to the lab and you're going to learn how to do a couple exercises. Really simple ones. You're going to learn how to do a leg press. So this is just a machine leg press. A leg extension, so a quad extension, again on a machine. A chest press, again on a standard machine. And a lat pull down. So we're not talking about anything fancy here. These are your run-of-the-mill exercise machines you might even find like in a decent hotel weight room. So no free weights, nothing magical about the workout. Now, you've got some experience in the gym, you pass this with flying colors, no problems. So now for the next week, they want you to record the food that you eat. And they want you to keep your diet as consistent as possible. Now, we know how hard this is, but in general, you know you're in a study, you know you've been asked to keep your food consistent. So while your recording may not be perfect, the key is you didn't do anything radical in this week, right? You didn't think, oh, I'm going to go out and crush a bunch of food or dramatically change my diet. You were told to be consistent. That's one thing humans can kind of do, right?
Now, hang on. That's from the moment you do your first test on the exercise machines.
Yeah. So right after you're done your intro to how to work out, they're like, hey, cool. John, for the next 7 days, you record what you eat and try to be as consistent as possible. And we want you back here in 7 days.
Right. And I'll just throw in the reason they use these type of machines is because they don't require like skilled technique.
Exactly.
Right. Like just lying down in a leg press, most people who have never even used one can kind of figure it out in 20 minutes. Whereas if you tried to measure squatting, that could take 6 months to a year to get your squat form just right.
I still don't have a good squat form.
Right. So it makes sense why they use machines. If you're listening and you're like, well, why didn't they do like more serious lifts? It's just it's too technique dependent, and that would skew everything.
Exactly. Now, on your way out, they hand you a package, you throw it in the freezer. And on 7 days later, so that night 6, you open up the package, and this is what you're supposed to eat the night before. It's basically a glorified 1980s microwave TV dinner, right? So it's about 2,000 calories, 310 grams of carbohydrates, 55 grams of fat, 75 grams of protein. It's a big meal, but that's all you get Thursday night. So you pound that back, and you got to be finished eating by 10, right? After 10, you can have water, but you're essentially done, which is not a problem because after eating that meal, you're pretty full. Right. Next morning, you arrive at the lab by about just a bit before 8 a.m. Right. So, you fasted all night, you arrive at the lab, and this is where the fun begins, right? Because you are now poked and prodded. They stick some catheters in, and they start recording sort of all the biometrics they want to have as you sit there and rest for about an hour and a half. So you're just sitting in a chair for about an hour and a half. You have some catheters in place. And they're sort of monitoring your pre-workout levels of various markers in your blood, etc. About an hour and a half go by. You're told, okay, now we're going to start the workout. So you warm up on a bike for about 5 minutes. And then you do a pretty simple full body workout. You do 4 sets of 10 reps on the leg press machine. And that first set is just a warm up. So it's 3 sets of 10. Now, you've got lab assistants and graduate students basically yelling and screaming and making sure you get like a full good 10 reps. Like you may have been able to do 11, but you definitely weren't getting 12. Like they really push you. Then you take you got about 2 minutes between each set. This is pretty standard. Then you move on and you do the leg extension machine. Then you do the lat pull down machine. Then finally the chest press machine. So 2 leg exercises, 2 upper body exercises. You're allowed about 2-minute rest. The whole thing takes just under an hour. Now, as soon as you're finished, your blood's taken again. And then, this is awesome, under some local anesthetic, you get your muscle in your biopsy, some muscle in your leg biopsy. So they make a little incision. They get this little grabby thing. They stick it in and they pull out a bit of muscle. They freeze it because they're going to measure stuff in it later. You think to yourself, like, it's probably going to hurt, but you get to do it multiple times for the next couple hours. Now, you're given a massive drink. And this drink does not taste good. It's not horrible either. It's about 27 ounces, so just shy of a liter for my Canadian folks. It's not great, but you manage to drink it down. And then for the next 12 hours, you sit in that lab. Your blood is drawn a total of 13 times. They take 3 more muscle biopsies, and you just sit there, and by about 9 at night, they're like, all right, you're good. Get out of here. You're allowed to leave. You get home, and you're done. Now, this is what I think is fascinating. That drink contained 100 grams of milk protein, basically concentrated milk protein, not much different than your standard shake, right? But this was special because this protein was radioactively labeled. So to give you some background, there are a couple of different types of carbon in the world, right? There is carbon 12 and carbon 13, which are stable versions of carbon. And then there's this naturally occurring radioactive carbon called carbon 14. Now, it's not radioactive, not going to turn you into the Incredible Hulk or anything like that. But what carbon 14 does is it allows us to trace anything that contains that carbon 14 through your body. So they actually fed carbon 14 to cows. The cows ingested that carbon 14, then they used it to make milk. The amino acids in that milk, because milk is a complete protein, has all the amino acids, all have a little bit of carbon 14 in them, which means we can now trace when you drink that milk or the protein from that milk, we can literally watch where those amino acids go in your body. So it allows us kind of an inside view as to what your body's doing with the protein that's provided, right? So they took this radioactively labeled amino acids. They made you pound back 100 grams of it. Some other people got 25 grams and some people got 0, but you're in the cool group. You got 100, right? Now, in that time, what they found was that your oxidation, or the amount of protein or amino acids that were being broken down and used as a fuel, did not really change. So even though you took in 100 grams of protein, very little of that radioactive carbon was being breathed out. It showed that those proteins were not being broken down or used as a fuel. They also noticed that there wasn't a massive difference in the amount that was leaving via your urine, right? So that protein was staying in your body. So, okay, we know that. Now what they did was they looked at where those amino acids were going. Obviously, into your blood, which is a good thing. And then from your blood into your muscles, and specifically into what we call myofibrillar protein synthesis. We could actually see those amino acids being incorporated into the fibers of your muscles. So a fantastic marker of muscle growth, because proteins are being incorporated into your muscles. Now, they were doing that specifically looking at muscle fibers, but they also looked at collagen and the connective tissue, and there's also an increase there. And there was an increase in sort of some other non-muscle areas, but the vast majority of those amino acids were slowly but surely being incorporated into your muscles. Now, not all at once, right? Because 100 grams of protein is a lot. So over 12 hours, the amino acids in your blood slowly continued to increase, just slowly elevated for a full 12 hours. And the amount being incorporated into your muscles also slowly increased over 12 hours. We noticed that they measured every marker of anabolism or growth you could imagine, and specifically the one everyone's always interested in, which is something called mTOR. Now, mTOR is considered the master regulator of sort of growth in your body. And it did peak, it did turn on, and then it turned back off after about 4 hours. Now, this is important because we've thought for a long time that mTOR had to be on in order for growth to take place, which is a large part of the reason you may have been told you got to eat protein every 4 to 6 hours, right? That whole idea of spacing out your protein to keep mTOR on. But this study showed us that mTOR is more like a push button start for your car, right? It just needs to be on to start the engine of growth. It can turn back off and growth is still occurring because you took enough amino acids in 100 grams and we measured for long enough, 12 hours, to see that even though mTOR has effectively been off for 4 or 5, even 6 hours, anabolism is still happening. Amino acids are still being incorporated into all the muscles that were exercised. So this is where this study becomes really, really cool, is at the end of 12 hours, when the only reason we stop at 12 hours is because that's literally when we had to stop studying you. All the markers of muscle growth were still elevated at 12 hours. Not like almost back down. I'm talking like if this was baseline, they're still up here. And we stopped measuring. You went home, but for all intents and purposes, you went home, went to bed that night, and we're still seeing an increase in amino acids being incorporated into your muscles, muscle growth. So the thing about the study is everyone's using it to prove, look, like if you eat 100 grams of protein after a workout, it all gets used for muscle growth, which is cool. It's a good finding. But something else, I think almost magical, happened in this trial. For the 12 hours that they were measuring these subjects were just sitting in a lab, being measured, not eating. They were fasted for multiple hours before the workout, and then for 12 hours after the workout. Now, they took in 100 grams of protein, and I'm sure it wasn't pure protein. So let's say there was some carbs, some fat. Maybe the drink had 600 calories in it. But over the course of 12 hours, even a small person at rest is utilizing more than 600 calories, right? They have to be. So you had to be fueling your metabolism from something. And we know from all of our research on fasting that something is typically body fat. But at the same time, we were measuring massive increases in muscle growth that were sustained over a 12-hour period and were still massively elevated when we stopped measuring at the 12-hour period. So these people were effectively fasting while their muscles were growing for 12 hours after a workout. And I think that is the beauty of this study. The part that everyone's missed is getting back to what you and I talked about earlier with Kevin Tipton's work. We were always fascinated by that, but those studies only lasted 4, sometimes 6 hours, right? So you thought, well, maybe after 6 hours it stopped. But this one went a full 12 hours. And they were still, by every marker we can measure, building muscle. But because we know they weren't eating, and it was a 12-hour duration of time, they had to have lost some body fat, right? Because it had to have been used as a fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have here is beautiful evidence of muscle growth and fat loss at the same time. And it's sort of been glazed over by everyone, just mesmerized by the 100 grams and not seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah, well, they probably weren't trying to measure fat loss, but it had to have come given the fact that the radio-labeled carbon shows that the protein ingested went into muscle growth and not oxidation, meaning your body's not burning it for just a normal operation.
Rules it out.
Yes, rules it out. So that means that energy to run your body has to come from somewhere. So it's either it's coming from fat or gluconeogenesis. Either way, it's coming from a different source, which is going to be at least some amount of fat. Yeah. Also, you said they started fasting 10 p.m. the night before?
The night before.
Right. So, and then they, besides the protein shake, when did they finally get to eat again? Not till
12 hours after the workout.
So this is like a 24-hour fast, but just with protein parked right in the middle. A workout and then protein parked right in the middle.
Yeah. And the really important part is at 12 hours, I mean, these levels were still elevated. They were still incorporating amino acids into their muscles. So there's no reason to think it ended at 12. In fact, at the height it probably ended 16, 18, maybe even 20 hours later, right? So in the worst case scenario, even if the protein synthesis ended, we know from our work with Eat Stop Eat and 24-hour fast that it's not like they all of a sudden just flipped a switch and lost all the muscle in the next 3 hours, right?
Well, so my other question is the radio label carbon, how many more hours is it? Is that's it? You can always detect it? Like if let's say you measured 48 hours later, is it still detectable?
Massive half-life. So yeah, you could probably call all those people back a couple of weeks later and still get a decent idea of what's going on. Yeah.
See, that would be super cool as a follow-up to see where are those carbons 5 days later, 2 weeks later. Can you still detect them in the muscle or did
because muscle doesn't turn over that quickly, right?
No,
it's 70 days. So you could probably call them back easily in 4 or 5 weeks to see what's going on. So I thought it was interesting too, because if you kind of opine on why does this work? You know, the obvious answer is like, well, the fasting increased IGF-1 or growth hormone, but I don't think that's it. I think the interesting thing is the lack of food provides almost zero sort of diet-induced inflammation, whereas we know that a workout causes an acute increase in inflammation, a type of inflammation that's needed for muscle growth. I'm wondering if it's a signal and noise thing, that the fact that these people were kind of low inflammation from food coming into this thing, massive workout, massive spike in protein, so a big burst of probably inflammatory markers, and then no other markers coming in, because remember also they weren't doing anything other than sitting in a lab for 12 hours, right? So just sitting there, not eating, which is sort of just anti-inflammatory by nature, resting, anti-inflammatory by nature, and just sitting there growing. So it is really fascinating, because to me, it makes me wonder if the way we've been suggesting people kind of go about their fasting and training, which would be fast, then train, and then eat. Now I'm wondering if based on this trial, at least occasionally, if you wouldn't want to go train, eat 100 grams of protein, fast, right? So then you know that during your fasting period, I mean, if you're incorporating amino acids into the muscle and your net balance is positive, because they measure that too, you can't be losing muscle during a fast then. No. Right? If they measured it as net positive, you can't be like, well, you're just losing it quicker, right? So really fascinating that way.
I want to see stuff like, okay, let's say they only train legs. Is it all radio labeled carbon up here in the legs only? Or does it actually kind of go all over the body? Like, can training one area intense enough, actually stimulate it to be incorporated, train one leg and not the other? And because I know this type of research has been done where even doing unilateral, like one side of the body, actually causes some reaction in the other side. So if all you did was train your left leg, I think even Tipton's work was, and it's there's some amount of effect even on the leg that didn't train. So I'd like to see this redone like that. Also, why not redo it, but that post-meal 100 grams of, or that post-workout 100 grams of protein, why not also add in some carbs and fat, just like a mixed meal? Now, let's see what happens. Yeah, just a meal. And let's see what happens there too. I mean, obviously, I get the fact, again, here we go. They're trying to control it. They're trying to see what's going on. But use the same radio-labeled protein, like the identical protein, and then just also add in some other food. And then what happens? Yeah,
allow them to have some pasta or rice or something along with it. Just whatever. Exactly. But super fat, to your point, because then you wonder, if you just blasted shoulders and then did this, are you pushing 100 grams of protein all into your shoulders that way, right? So really fascinating. The one thing I'm interested in is I remember going over work from Nottingham with Greenhoff, and he did see with a high protein diet an increase in protein oxidation. So the body eventually realizes this is the fuel source coming in. So I'm wondering if in order to get the most out of this concept, if it would be occasional, once or twice a week. So you do your normal workouts, and then once or twice a week, maybe you hit a whole body and then do this sort of anabolic fasting of 100 grams of protein and then a fast afterwards, right? Like I'm wondering, or I'm guessing that your body would eventually get used to a bolus of 100 grams and understand how to deal with it. And part of the novelty in this trial is asking an average person to take a day's worth of protein and eat it all in one sitting after workout, which I've done multiple times now, and it gets to be easier and easier. It ends up being basically a meal and a shake. So it's not horrible.
And there was no control arm where they just had people who didn't work out and still took the 100 grams?
No control from didn't work out, but controls people at 0 grams of protein and people at 25. And 25 did exactly what we'd expect, right? It blipped up, and then it came back down by about hour 4. But something about the 100 was just like,
So no one's ever done so we're going to call this a 24-hour fast because that's essentially what it was, but with the protein parked right in the middle. So do we even know, is there data where you just get people to drink 100 grams of protein without training, nothing, and just see what happens to the 100 grams of protein?
So I've been looking, and it's really hard to find. It's easy to find high protein diet research, right? It's really hard to find high protein single meal research, right? And because that's what I was looking for. I'm like, well, what's the hormonal response to 100 grams? I'm trying to figure out, is there a reason why this worked? Is there something, once you get past a certain threshold of protein, does that anything above 75 cause X, and X is what explains this? And there really isn't that much. There isn't a lot of research looking at 100 grams in a single meal. So
Yeah,
we're kind of lost there.
To me, the obvious question is, would all that just end up in your muscles anyways? Because you went over this, like 100 grams is so much all at once. Your body, and like you said, if the body cannot ramp up protein oxidation to use it as a fuel source, would it just end? Would the study turned out the same without the workout, and the radio labeled carbon from the protein ends up in your muscles anyways, because it's the best place to put it?
We would have proof of concept from all the trials that looked at post-workout protein and workouts with the 30 or 40 gram dose range, showing that much more of it was pushed into the working muscles after a workout. Now, mind you, we also can argue the semantics of after workout, right? Because it seems like it can be anywhere from minute 1 after workout to almost hour 20 after workout. You're still in that sort of post-workout phase. But we do have evidence that the workout itself drives a demand for the amino acids to go into the muscles. Right. So we know that. But at 100 grams, to your point, maybe that's just overridden.
Well, yeah, maybe there's a threshold. And I mean, I can think of a dozen studies to do off of this one just to find out what's going on. Like, what happens if you go 200 grams? Is it, I mean, you could have done more grades. So like, and all of this with and without working out, just to see what happens to that same protein if you don't work out at all. But in the absence of any other food, like Brad point, that's a really good point, that there was no, they stopped eating at 10 p.m. and they don't eat again. So
basically 10 the next day, right?
Yeah, remember they're not allowed to even leave the lab till like 9 or 10 at night, and the only thing they have is that 100 grams of protein. Like, what I would love to see that multiple doses of that protein in people who don't work out, and then the same thing, multiple doses. I mean, go way up, go 50, 100. Now that they've set the precedent with 100, what can you do with 150? Like, at some point, is there just a limit to what the body can handle? Or,
well, that's interesting, because
the other thing here is the training stimulus. No, the training stimulus could be more and more. I mean, what they did there, okay, they had to standardize it, but what if you just doubled that training volume?
Yeah, I was wondering that too, right? So we have interesting data and we can talk about sort of a true carnivore diet, like not a human carnivore diet, but like an actual animal carnivore diet, and kind of think about how this mimics that. Your true carnivore would track down prey, take down that prey, eat a fair amount of that prey, and then sit around and do nothing for 3 or 4 days. A jaguar would maybe take what's left of that prey, hide it in a tree, and come back to it a bit later on. But it would be almost exactly this trial. It would be a workout, a massive meal of protein, and then sitting on a rock sun tanning for 2 to 3 days, right? So there is kind of a precedent that there are other species, mind you, with very different GI tracts than we have, but still, there is precedent that that's what they do. And I will tell you from my experimenting with this that 100 grams of protein into a 170-pound man is enough that by hour 20, 22 of fast, I'm just getting a little peckish. I'm like, I could eat. But those early ones, there's no interest at all. Like, you are full. And this is just, again, a light meal containing about 30 or 40 grams of protein and a shake containing 60, right? So I'm not full because I had 15 potatoes. I'm full of protein. Right.
And we do know there's decent data to suggest protein's relatively satiating. So when you eat, I mean, the research is old, but when you eat, eat protein and then compare it to eating carbs, and then I don't know if it's compared to directly just fat, but a mixed meal.
It was just fat as well, yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, so then protein is pretty satiating, so more so than maybe the other two, even though fat is as well, but definitely more so than carbs. So it's reasonable that 100 grams of protein doesn't leave you feeling like I need that much more if you were told like that's all you're getting. It should hold you. It's very reasonable that it could hold you over for a while.
Well, if you, again, looking at the trial, they were doing also rate of appearance into the blood. And so that was sort of, it increased, but it was still elevated at hour 12, which means you were still kind of releasing from your GI tract, right? Like, it's not like it was just mad bullets of 100 hitting your muscles on hour 1. It was a big bolus and then a maintained elevated amount of blood amino acids all the way up until hour 12. So yeah, it would make sense you're full. I also tell you that the heat generated, the thermic effect of that amount of protein is enough that doing a full body workout, then 100 grams of protein and jumping in a sauna afterwards is a horrible idea. Like you just sweat. So you feel it. So, but yeah, not hungry for those. I mean, if anyone who battles with being able to finish a 24-hour fast, regardless of the workout stuff, etc., just a higher protein meal before the fast. Now I'm like, that makes it. It might have to be really high, but it definitely makes a difference.
Yeah, you could precede the fast. So not this like not cut a fast in half, but if you're going to try 24 hours or 20, then maybe the last thing you do is eat like a big bolus, a big protein meal, and that theoretically could help with the compliance on the fast. The fast might feel less difficult, like to get through it. So I mean, there's so many things to consider here. It's how many times can you do this before your body does start upregulating protein oxidation. So essentially using protein as a fuel source. Can you do this once or twice a week on a bigger workout and sort of leverage the reaction such that you're, I don't know, accelerating your ability to grow and recover muscle? That would be interesting to. I mean, it's hard to know because they just stopped measuring, and as Brad walked you through how cumbersome that day was, you could imagine people like, no, I'm just not coming back in for more of this. Like, this is why. So that
muscle biopsies suck.
Yeah, that procedure and how intrusive that whole thing was. So my first thought was when you said they went to the lab, I'm like, they didn't get to drink a coffee, so they just showed up. And they didn't get to have their morning coffee, so they showed up ready to push what I would imagine was pretty hard. They didn't want them they wanted to push. Again, I've been in studies like this or run studies like this. It's really hard to get a standard push when you're asking your subjects to like lift a weight or. I mean, just the idea that everyone in the study, let's say, well, we made them lift, 70% of their 1 rep max for X number of reps. Like, did you really know that you were at their max? And did you really know they put in max effort? And you could see, and I've been in studies where, again, I keep saying I've run studies where one subject to the next, and again, in this particular one, they had to go as hard as they could. Yeah. And they were on a dynamometer that it didn't matter how hard they pushed, the machine only goes one speed, but it can tell how hard you're pushing against it.
So it pushes back against you.
And it was a leg dynamometer. So you're pushing as hard as you can, but it's only going to go just its own speed, but it can precisely measure how much force you're putting into it. And I remember afterwards going, half of those people, that was nowhere near their max push. But our data was supposed to be, in our procedures, everyone did a maximum. Like, no, they didn't. Like, I could just tell they weren't doing it. And I'm like, okay, well, and again, this particular trial was knee osteoarthritis, so their knees hurt, and we were still asking them to a max push. So, anyways, but the point is, it's hard to standardize even just what happened at the exercise portion, and that would be interesting if we could have just, at minimum, expanded more and more. Exercise.
So many questions. Like my one was really quickly go, okay, so we do this around 5 p.m. You and I hit a full body workout, which I hate doing, but I've gotten better at them. We hit our 100 grams of protein. We fast. The next morning, what if we woke up and we're like, I'm just gonna hit a little bit of biceps or a little bit of shoulders and see if I can't re-engage that system, right? Turn mTOR back on, turn the muscle building machinery back on, and still have some amino acids that can be used. And as long as those amino acids are being incorporated in the muscle, they're not being used as a fuel, which means I'm increasing the fat burning, the amount of body fat I'm using as a fuel. Like, there's so many questions from this one. But the novelty of the 100 grams is great. But for me, this is the holy grail of, I wish they measured RQ or respiratory quotient, how much fat they're using as a fuel. Because it looks...
Didn't?
No. Well, at least, if they're smart, they did, and it's just not in this paper, right? One good study can be like 6 papers, right? But if they did, then you have the holy grail. You have, in a 24-hour period, you have muscle growth with fat loss, right? So, which, by the way, that John and I are calling this anabolic fasting trademark. So when people start talking about it, you heard it here first.
You know what, though?
So much to do with it.
people always ask us this. They're like, "Can I have some protein during my fast?" And this kind of validates their intuition that if they've been working out, they're like, "Well, can I at least put some protein in?"
Yeah.
And this kind of validates, well, if your goal is to just burn fat and build muscle, yeah, kind of. Like, it's actually not a bad idea at all.
Okay, so I have an observation for you to opine on. So obviously this paper came out in December. So me being me, I've been doing anabolic fasting since the 1st of January. Here's a really weird one for you. I will do a full body workout, almost exactly the way they outline, but with free weights because I don't have machines in the basement. Then I will eat 100 grams of protein, and then I will fast. At the end of that fast, I will start eating again because the fast is over. And then about 4 hours after that, the muscle soreness kicks in. So for the full 24 hours of the fast, nothing. Like it's like I didn't work out. And then as soon as I start, even though I had the 100 grams of protein, and then as soon as I start eating again, possibly allowing for a higher level of inflammation because I'm just eating a mixed meal, right? My mixed meals are, there's some processed food in there, we'll just say it that way. It's like 3 hours later, sore to the touch. So it's a very big delay, but not your DOMS delay. It's very dependent on the minute I start eating sort of larger average meals, it hits.
So the question there is that just so you're saying this is not what you is familiar delayed onset muscle soreness?
I'm
this is a different?
sore the next day with my workouts. Like I am sore that next morning almost always with the way I train. So to have it delayed a full 24 and then kick in the minute a bigger meal happens, like an hour after that is noticeable.
So post workout you have the protein shake, then you fast for 24.
Yeah.
Oh, and then you're saying maybe normally when you start eating after 12ish, the delayed onset muscle starts showing up after 12.
Yeah.
Oh, so that would be awesome to study. Is like, why is it related to the minute you add in a mixed meal? Likely, probably the carbohydrates. I doubt the fats doing anything.
Yeah.
Stimulates an inflammatory response. But then the question is that also necessary?
Yeah. Now we know that the inflammatory response from the weight training itself is specific to, I want to say like TNF, like very specific cytokines or inflammatory molecules. But those are different from the inflammation you get from a long distance run, which are different from the inflammation you get from being sick, and I think are different from the inflammation from a very large mixed meal. So you and I talked about this way back in 2011 about the signal and noise theory of muscle building, right? And I'm starting to wonder if there's something there, because the minute I start eating a mixed meal again, that soreness comes in. It's fascinating to me. I think that inflammation and the specific cytokines and markers of inflammation might be the key to this, but obviously they didn't measure them. At least they didn't report them in this first paper.
Well, and we also reviewed a new drug that seems to be able to block the myostatin pathway to some degree, and in that paper they were also mentioning that inflammation itself can potentially stimulate those pathways, which is a pathway to quote stop muscle growth. So maybe the longer you do not, the longer you keep that pathway sort of unstimulated, I don't know how else to say it, the longer chance that muscle can grow. And then the minute you introduce something that could stimulate an inflammatory pathway, that one of the things it's doing is just ramping up those stop muscle growth signals. Yeah. So it's, I mean,
they measured myostatin in this actually.
They did?
Let me see if I can find it.
Oh, well, then that would be really good. I mean, obviously there's so many different pathways you could look at. And again, as the person who's in the trial, just being poked and prodded, and there's only so much you can put up with until it's just, until it's too much. And again, but to Brad's point, maybe all that data is coming out in a follow-up paper, 2 or 3 follow-up papers. Let's hope all of that, if they did capture all that, let's hope that's coming out. The interesting thing
myostatin was still low at hour 12 in the 100 gram protein group.
Lower than like a control or lower than normal?
Yeah. And I mean, we've got some pretty big error bars. I'll send you to look at it, but it's fascinating.
Right. So that's important. And just as a reminder, myostatin is the pathway that is the stop muscle growth pathway. So if you can limit or inhibit myostatin and its associated pathways, that theoretically should cause more muscle growth. So everything points to if you can put in a lot of protein after a workout, you're likely going to get the most bang for your buck for whatever that workout could do for your muscle growth. And it seems to not even matter if you eat or not. Again, there was no control here. And the other two arms that I'd like to see is just that much protein, no workout. Yeah. And then the workout plus that protein plus some food.
Yeah.
And to Brad's point, is that extra food, specifically carbs, maybe introducing an inflammatory pathway that might get in the way of what happened here with almost essentially all of that protein, those amino acids appearing as per carbon labeled right in the muscles.
You know what they didn't measure, at least didn't report in this one, is insulin, right? So, because then your question is, would a high insulin spike, I mean, it's obviously been high from 100 grams of protein, but even higher spike if you had a bunch of dextrose in there as well, would it have shunted amino acids into other body systems, right? Instead of preferentially muscle. So again, questions.
It gets complicated fast. I mean, protein does stimulate insulin. People who think it does, that's not, protein can stimulate insulin release too. But you're right. The minute carbohydrates are introduced at the same time, you're activating a lot more than just the protein. Like doing something like, and this was liquid, right?
Yeah.
So it's getting in fast.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
It's going fast. It's not like they ate a pile of meat and that takes a while, to go in. This is drinking protein is about as close as you can get to infusing it straight into your veins. That would be interesting. Go 100 grams. Can you even do that? 100 grams in your veins? It'd probably be pretty hard.
It'd have to be free-form aminos. And then you wonder, is it specific to, because we know that milk protein builds...
right. It would have to be
micelles. Right? What are they called? It releases slower. But so super, super fascinating. This is Luc van Loon, group out of the Netherlands, and he's been at this for a while. So he's one of the, him, Kevin Tipton, Stu Phillips, one of the sort of the major protein guys out there.
Right.
So there probably weren't a lot of corners cut. My only apprehension is that he comes out and be like, oh yeah, we fed them the whole time during 12 hours, just didn't report it, which would be horrible, right? But he's not that irresponsible in his reporting. So it's fascinating to me, but it really opens up a whole window, because if you could time it so that the exact same time you're recovering from a workout, you're building muscle and you're fasting, so you're losing fat, and then 24 hours after that, you just go back to eating normally and hanging out for a bit. Like, you're kind of getting, in your and I love of getting a bunch of things done at the same time. So you're building muscle, losing fat, and recovering over 24 hours. That's beautiful.
No, now I'm curious, how many days in a row can you do this?
Yeah, because you will. Oh, that's the other thing I was wanted to bring a point up is the magic also that, and I'd have to really dig into how they report it. On that day they had 100 grams of actually no, because they only had 100. So it's not like they were 200 grams for that day, but then 100 for all the other days. But I would imagine you could probably do this either a couple times in a row or once or twice a week. But as long as your body's not regularly getting 100-gram boluses, I mean, if you're getting 100 grams serving of protein twice a week, and then every other serving is, somewhere between 20 and 40 multiple times per day, I think that the signal there is, hey, you got to be able to manage 20 or 40 grams, and then 100 grams is just sort of an anomaly. Like, as long as you can keep it as an anomaly, you might continue to have this effect.
Right. So when you hear these recommendations about how much protein to eat in a day, and it's whatever per gram per pound of body weight, whatever the recommendation is, this kind of what Brad's suggesting is, okay, well, what if you, on average, so if you average it out over 7 days, 2 weeks, whatever, it averages to whatever that number might be. But it doesn't mean you do it every day. And potentially a bigger anabolic effect is you load it up on the days where you do the most weight training, or only the days you do the weight training, you do a big, because no one really trains with weights all 7 days of the week. I mean, most people don't. So if you do 3 big workouts a week, even if you have smaller ones, the 3 big ones, that's where you park like a huge amount of protein right after the workout. And then by almost by definition or by necessity, you drop your protein content to something below that The other
manageable
days,
on normal meals, right? You're almost back to the high school 1990s version of when you could barely afford your protein powders, so you only took a shake after your workouts. Remember that? You basically have a shake Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but you did not any other day because you had to make that thing last a month, right? So,
well, this is funny. All of this research that's 20, 30 years later seems to just be confirming whatever the bodybuilders had no science to prove it. What they were doing 30 years ago, they're like, well, yeah, I eat a lot of protein, and in order to lose fat, I just cut down all my calories, but I keep my protein high. So
Yep.
this is just kind of just confirming what bodybuilders always did. Like every bodybuilder I've ever seen get prep for a show, their protein intake just keeps going up and up and up while their calories keep going down and down and down towards the show, to the point where I'm not going to say that they're doing this where it's just protein,
but pretty
man,
bloody close.
they're getting goddamn close. Like it
Yeah.
is 200-300 grams of protein, which is even higher than, again, not all at once, but like throughout the day. And then just some, salad and a little bit of, like, it's such a nominal amount of carbs and hardly any fat. So they're approaching this
Yeah.
as there's no research paper to prove it, but they've learned it from somebody who learned it from somebody who learned it from somebody. And they're like, yeah, this is how you maintain as much of that muscle as possible, and you get rid of as much of that fat as possible, and you can work out and keep the muscles hopefully, growing, if not at least stopping them from quote unquote shrinking as you diet down. This is kind of just decades later proving what they kind of anecdotally figured out already.
Yeah. Yeah. So I really like it. I'm going to go backwards through Tipton's work and see if we can kind of add stuff in. But if I were to optimistically experiment based off of this, I would do 2 full body workouts a week, followed by 100 grams of protein, followed by my 24-hour eat, stop, eat style fast. And then during that fast, I wouldn't be training or anything because it's my day off kind of thing. And then in between those big full body workouts, I'd hit a shoulder workout or a bicep, whatever legging muscle group I'm playing around with, right? On the other days. So I wouldn't just do 2 workouts a day, but 2 workouts a week. I do 2 big ones and then a couple smaller ones. So a couple workout snacks, if you will.
Yeah. So to try to try to incorporate this. So yeah. So like, I guess I guess if you already have a workout habit, there's the way you might want to incorporate this. If you not already have this habit of eating more protein after a workout, to me, the simplest thing is you just eat more after your workout. And then the theory here that I guess they haven't necessarily proven is, and Brad's attempting to do a little bit of, self-experimentation here, is you hold off on introducing carbs or fats for a little while thereafter. Now, maybe you don't have to go as far as Brad, like the full anabolic fasting 24 hour, like protein then 24 hours.
No.
But it's interesting that you found that muscle soreness literally holds on until you finally introduce carbohydrates.
Yeah.
So it might maybe not 24, but maybe just the day. Like,
yeah, what? I didn't plan on 20. I was actually going to try to do, I thought maybe like a 16, but I will tell you, so I think I had my first one, I worked out, I had to have 100 grams of protein around 5. So that next morning around 8 or 9, when it was 16 hours, I was like, I'm not eating. So 24 almost came about because I was like, oh, that's about when I got hungry. So you'd be surprised at how, because I wanted 16, because then I was like, maybe I could do this 3 times a week type of thing. But yeah, so just kind of to John's point, just kind of go until you're like, ooh, now it's time to eat again. Mm-hmm. But the possibility of this is kind of that holy grail where you're building muscle and losing fat at the same time, allowing you to chunk all the hard work into 1 or 2 times a week is really fascinating to me.
Yeah, if anything, it strikes me as maybe one of the best ways to apply it and see if it works is let's say you are trying to strip off some fat. You could theoretically do this like on a daily basis for some amount of time or chunks of the week where this is how you go through your week. And you don't have to just do 100 grams, maybe try a couple, maybe 150 grams. If you can even get that in, I suppose you can.
Yeah.
And if it's going to hold off your appetite, you could theoretically make it a week or 2. I can't imagine going much more in a couple of weeks like this. But if every other day, even this was your day, I mean, we've had people we work with fast for 10 days straight. Like I mean, nothing, just black coffee, nothing.
Crazy.
Right. And I know that's really hard to do. And after a certain number of days, you do start, it's actually, you do need to get protein back in. So the first thing that has to come back, it's not carbs, it's not fat, but you got to get protein back in at some point.
I also say it gets so boring, eh? After about hour 70, you're just so bored without eating or planning or doing anything around food. It's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're not going to be able to work out through all of that. But if you, theoretically, if all you ate was protein for a number of days, this suggests, again, we're projecting, but this suggests you could kind of keep working out, keep building muscle, and just get by on protein for a while, and you're just going to force your body to burn fat. There's just no way around that.
If the whole carnivore tribe can do it for a decade or years, however long, we could probably get away with it for 3 days out of a week, right?
And then the question is that this paper couldn't and wasn't designed to answer is how much of that can you do? How often can you just repeat this day?
Before the oxidation increases.
Before your body starts also using the protein as a fuel source, which it eventually will. The only question is, I mean, could the exercise stimulus override that, and the muscles beat the rest of your body out and demand the protein versus the rest of your body using it as a fuel source? That means forcing your body to just continue burning fat.
Yeah. And the reason I like it too is you and I found more often than not when it comes to human physiology that the answer is some sort of sine wave, right? Flat lines usually mean death with humans, right? So this whole idea of like peaks and valleys, and this kind of fits into that idea. So it's just some fun for it's a great study, really well done, but also something that anybody listening can very easily kind of experiment with. Just hit a workout, hit 100 grams of protein, then don't eat for, I guess, anywhere from 12 to 24, and just see how you feel, and then kind of go from there. But it's fascinating that someone finally, like, think about how long it's been, and someone finally was like, I'm going to study out longer. Instead of just 4 or 6 hours, let's go 12 and see what happens, right? And it's about time someone did it, but I'm really happy they did.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing, were these people naive to training?
They were.
Did it not say?
Students did. Let me see here. Yeah. You know, it's one of those weird trials where a lot of the info is in other documents.
Oh, right.
So let me see.
I'd imagine
all the results.
I'd imagine it doesn't really matter. When I say naive to training, they've never worked out.
Male students, and I think they had to hold off on training for a week, but I don't think they were necessarily like haven't trained in months kind of guys.
Okay, right. So, I mean, it's probably similar, whether or not they were naive or they know they work out regularly. They're just told to back off for a week. That's probably just so that there's not clearly it's because there's not a confounding variable of what happens if they worked out 24 hours ago. That would be
36 recreationally active young men in a university setting, University of Maastricht, I think is how you say it, between the ages of 18 and 40, healthy, body mass index between 18.5 and 30. They weren't allowed to, they couldn't be smokers, and they couldn't do sports or exercise less than 1 but more than 3 times per week. So you're just your typical university student who might hit the gym once or twice a week, maybe. Maybe some extra.
So they're not gym rats. This isn't
gym rats. Yeah.
Right. So then that's another question. What happens when you take someone who's training regularly? Can they still...
Do we get this response? This is such a robust
we get this response? Yeah, if
Yeah.
you've been training real hard for like 6-7 years, is this going to happen? Does it happen even better?
Yeah, that's the crazy part.
Yeah, like do you... Yeah, so there's... I mean, obviously, this would require unlimited budgets and a lab, and I don't know how you could keep doing study after study like that. But in the end, okay, I guess we should wrap it up here, right?
Yeah, it's really cool, but let's see. It's a great wrap up is that a lot of people missed the fasting component of this study, and that the fasting component of this study makes it something wicked cool for our type of peoples to experiment with, because it does open the possibility of that kind of holy grail of building muscle and losing fat at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And then I would just add to that, if hopefully it gives you some confidence that you can really drop your calories, still work out hard, and as long as you keep the protein pretty high, and I mean directly post workout, you can seems as though you can do both. You can grow muscle and burn fat, and you can go pretty low with your calories at least for a few days, and be confident, I would say, that you're not actually sacrificing muscle at all. And if anything, you're actually building it.
Yeah. And for those people who do the one meal a day type, that this is kind of evidence that you're not drastically off in your approach. And for people who, now this isn't to say that people who had 40 grams of protein 3 or 4 times throughout a day would have seen any different result. It's just that maybe the total volume of protein and not the way you broke it up is what matters most, including eating a bunch and not eating at all for 12 hours.
Right.
Yeah,
All right.
super fun.
Yep. All right. Well, that was a good explanation of that study. All right. So I think that's a good place to leave it for today.
Yeah.
All right. So for Brad
Oh, hey,
Pilon,
this episode
hang
was
on.
brought to you by the Total Tea Clinic.
Oh, yes, it was. Yep. Good call. All right. So for Brad Pilon, I'm John Barbin, and that's your Phi Life Podcast.